You heard about this creature? Kirobo is a small robot, 34 centimeter, comes to about your knee or something, built by Japan. Needless to say, it's Japan is ways ahead of the rest of the world in robotics, and this robot has been sent to space on Sunday. That is how it came into the news. If you are watching some news channel, well, but maybe BBC or something else, the Japanese space agency has sent this robot into space. It is a small robot which can recognize speech, understand what you are saying, talk back and recognize faces and so on essentially. And the idea is that this robot will be a companion for a Japanese astronaut who is likely to who is scheduled to go in November sometime, and that is an interesting idea, robots as companions of people. So, if you remember, we had talked about, or I had mentioned about this chess grandmaster David Levy. In 1968, he had a chess bet. Okay, so we had talked about it in the last class, and he had said that no program can beat him for the next 10 years, which he luckily survived the bet, because now as we know chess playing programs are much better. But in 2008, he is talking about robot companions. So, he has swung from one end of the pendulum, in which he believed that a computer program could not do anything interesting, to the other end where he believes that robots can be companions to human beings essentially. Okay. So, he wrote this book, it was published in 2008, and the title of the book is Love and Sex with Robots. And the idea behind the book is something which many parts of the world are looking at, especially those parts of the world which have aging populations, where they do not have enough young to take care of the old. But of course, he is not talking of the old here, but where robots could take care of people essentially. So, robots can be companions and so on. Okay, so, that is a book he wrote in 2008, and for example, what looks like a young lady, whereas in fact it is a robot, the thing here. So, this idea of creating robots in the image of us has been around for a long time, and we will look at some of this history today, and robotic companions could well be there in the future essentially. Okay. So, we saw in the last class, so I will just quickly go over this. We saw the syllabus which will be available in some place, and the textbooks, and these are the two books that we will be following in the next couple of lectures. AI, the Very Idea by Hogeland, and Machines Who Think by Pamela McCorduck. We saw some definitions of AI. So, there are four things here. One is that if they do, machines are intelligent if they do things which human beings are considered to be intelligent for. Another definition is that AI is the enterprise of solving hard problems and finding polynomial time solutions, and we must of course qualify that by saying that these are approximate solutions, or not, they are not necessarily optimal solutions. And then the AI is the study of mental faculties by creating computational models. That is the idea given by Charniak and McDermott. but the definition that we like most is given by Hogeland, and the definition says that AI is interested in the idea of machines with minds of their own essentially, and this is the idea that we will pursue in the next couple of lectures essentially. We asked some fundamental questions in the last class, what is intelligence, what is thinking, and we got several responses here about what we think is intelligent behavior. So, problem solving, reasoning, learning, perception and language. Language was mentioned in the last class as well. So, let me ask a question here. Language is something which is unique to human beings, and many people believe that it is instrumental in intelligent behavior. But the question that I want to ask is, if you look at language and thought, what came first? So, was thinking a precursor to language, or was language a precursor to thinking? In a sense, is our ability to think dependent upon the skill of language that we have, or did language come because we are able to think? So, let me see what people think here, and again I will emphasize that there is no correct answer to this question, in the sense that it is like the chicken and egg problem. But what do students think? And I hope students from Mandi will also join in with their opinions. Can we think without language? Okay, let me ask it this way. Or is thinking closely tied to language? You are saying no, we can think without language. So, can you sort of justify or support your answer?
Images don't necessarily have a language.
Sorry?
Abstract
Graphical images or something.
Graphical images don't necessarily have a language.
abstract thoughts we have, so those are not language. Those are not language dependent or something.
Yeah. So, abstract thoughts are not language dependent. Now, that is a somewhat debatable claim essentially. So, the question I am asking really is that are thoughts made up of language, or are thoughts, do thoughts imply language? Can we think without taking recourse to language? Okay. So, when we say language, we really mean symbol, because language is just one kind of a symbol system essentially. Is it possible to think? Now, you said graphics or visual images, yeah, that is a thing which comes to mind, that if you recall visual images, then you are not really talking about words or things like that. Interestingly, you have heard of Chomsky, right? Yeah, so is there anyone who has not heard of Noam Chomsky? What is he doing nowadays? He visited India a few years ago as well. So, he has actually become a political activist. But many years ago, when he was active in linguistics, he put forward the idea of universal grammar. Okay, so, UG as it is called, and he said that human beings are born with a grammar in their heads, whatever that means. Okay, in their heads, we will not explore that question, but essentially our brains come pre-wired with the faculty of linguistic ability, which is sort of some kind of a grammar. And what he says is that depending upon which place, which society you grew up in, you tune that grammar to that particular language that exists in that society essentially. Okay. So, Chomsky of course, so is saying that language came first, that we are born with the ability to use language, and maybe that helped us, because he is not saying that, but maybe that helped us in our ability to think essentially. But anyway, that is an open question, maybe at some later point we will come back to it. So, we also asked some questions as to what is a machine, is a computer a machine, and we said that yes, we will assume that whenever we talk of machines thinking, we will be talking about computer programs running. And of course, we asked the question that are we machines, that is something you can ponder over and some reactions to that. Okay, so, historically there have been arguments against thinking. So, we had discussed 3 arguments by Dreyfus, which say that there is something intuitionistic going on in our heads, something which is kind of intuition which we cannot define in terms of rules. So, when Dreyfus was talking about all this, people were talking about rules as a mechanism for reasoning, and he said that there is certain kind of unconscious instincts that we have which cannot be captured in rules essentially. John Searle, a philosopher, used the Chinese room argument, and the essence of the argument was that just because you can manipulate symbols and convince somebody that you are doing something, like for example, children doing long division, do they understand whether what is what are they really doing, or when even younger children do addition. So, they add 2 numbers by looking up a table, do a carry over, then add, and so on and so forth. You are doing simple manipulation. Are you understanding what is behind that activity essentially? Or older students, should I say, when they are dealing with things like Fourier transforms and so on and so forth. Are you doing it mechanically, or have you mugged up a formula of how to integrate something, or do you understand what is happening behind that essentially? So, what Searle says is that symbol manipulation, the ability to manipulate symbols is not necessarily a guarantee that you are intelligent. Maybe you are following some rules which somebody has taught you, this is how you add numbers and so on and so forth. And Penrose, the celebrated scientist, Nobel laureate, says that there is something quantum mechanical going on in our brains essentially. So, there are other arguments based on emotion, intuition, consciousness, ethics and so on, which we will ignore. Then along came Turing, Alan Turing, and he said that the question whether machines can think is meaningless. Let us not try and answer, because first you have to answer what is thinking, and only then you can say whether machines can think essentially or not essentially. He said that let me prescribe a test which is called as the imitation game, and which we now call the Turing test, and at that time when he prescribed it, in this book that is mentioned in this slide here, sorry, in the paper that is mentioned here, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, appeared in 1950, it is available on the link that is given in the page. He believed that in 50 years from then, which is in 2000, machines would be able to pass his so called Turing test essentially. And what is the test? This is where we stopped in the last class. The test is that there is a human judge sitting out there interacting over some medium. It could be nowadays a mobile phone where you are chatting with someone, or in those days it was a teletype which was connected to another room in which the other person was responding. And what Turing said was that if the human judge can confidently discriminate whether the other side is man or a computer, then the computer has failed the test. But if the computer can most of the times convince the judge that the judge is talking to a human, then the computer has passed the Turing test. So, this is what is known as a Turing test of intelligence, you might say. To test whether a system is intelligent, you pass it through the Turing test and then decide whether it is intelligent. You do not ask what do you mean by thinking, what is intelligence, and that do not go into fundamentals. And as we said, there is a Loebner prize which is currently available, still not $100,000 US for anybody who can pass the test, so to speak, essentially. So, the question which I left the class with was, what do you think of the Turing test as a test of intelligence? Do you have any views on this? Is it a good test? Is it a bad test? Do you agree that if a computer passes the test, it will be considered to be intelligent, it will qualify to be called intelligent? Any thoughts on this? Okay, while you are thinking, meanwhile, let me address the Monday students. So, welcome again, and the basic idea of the first few lectures is that they are going to be a study of history and philosophy behind AI, what has happened in the last few 100 years, which has led to the development of AI currently. And after those 2 or 3 lectures, we will have a qualitative shift, and we will spend most of the time using algorithms, using the syllabus which I will convey to you essentially. So, is it a good test or a bad test? Surely you can have some opinion.
I mean, I cannot judge the intelligence because, like any programmer can see the past behavior, like what type of questions are there in the conversation, and based on that data.
Yes. In fact, that is precisely what happens. This Loebner prize is a contest which takes place every year, and as we said, this year it is going to, the final is going to take place on September 14, and this one of the leading programs is called IZAR, and this is a conversation transcript from the earlier competition round. So, you have seen it and you can look at it again. So, obviously, people who write such programs look at the history, just like students who write exams, they look at the history of past questions, even such people this thing. So, that is all allowed, everything is allowed. Can you write a computer program which will fool the judge, if you want to use the term, to thinking that the judge is talking to a human being? And this was the conversation that we saw this Izar had, and he is making statements like I am getting into, when he is talking about music, he is making statements about, in the last couple of lines you will see I am getting into Humi, a type of Mongolian throat singing, what kind of music do you like? So, obviously, such a program will have to be equipped with general knowledge, at least, which everybody knows essentially. Okay. So, I mean, no human would not knowing it essentially. So, you have to have that kind of a knowledge. Of course, you also have to have some kind of a rhetorical skills and ways of getting around questions and things like that, all that is part of it. What if I were to give it 2 12-digit numbers to multiply, say what is the product of 2,029,000,000 whatever, some 12-13 digit number, I say I give 2 12-digit numbers and ask it what is the product of that, and the computer, poor thing, being a computer, gives me the answer before I even finish the question, almost finish the question. Won't I be able to say no, you are not a human being? Okay. So, I will again leave it to you to think about this. Is this a good test or a bad test? But we did mention ELIZA or ELIZA, program written in 1966, when computers had just come into place by Joseph Weizenbaum, and it is a program for simple manipulation of rules. It would take the user's input, do a little bit of twisting, turn it around a bit and put it back to the user, and to some people it's one version of it called doctor sounded like a psychotherapist, and they would start talking to the program as if they were talking to a therapist. And this was a Russian scientist who was visiting Stanford, who actually went through this conversation, and we saw that in the last class. And what you see in purple is the fact that how this program is manipulating your input into generating its own output essentially. So, something like I am feeling a bit tired and it says why do you think you are feeling a bit tired. This is standard, and new questions like tell me about your family and so on. Weizenbaum did not like the way people responded to ELIZA. It is a very simple program, it is nothing deep sophisticated about it, but people used to interact with it as if they were interacting with somebody who understood the complexities of their problems and things like that essentially. So, he wrote this book Computer Power and Human Reason from Judgment to Calculation. He wanted to say in essence that AI is not possible, that computers can never be as deep thinkers as a therapist can be essentially. So, there is this difference between what can be and what appears to be essentially, and human beings have a tendency, we are willing to suspend our disbelief essentially. We are willing to watch a James Bond movie and believe that all that is happening is possible and all kinds of things essentially. So, the fact that a man made artifact could respond to human input easily leads humans to take a leap of faith and conclude that it responds intelligently and knowledgeably. Throughout centuries we have been doing that essentially. So, in olden times in Egypt, people believed that statues which moved and gestured had a sort of a soul, and they could represent a god or a dead person and communicate through a priest essentially. So, I said olden times Egypt, but even today you can find in our country this sort of a thing happening. You have people who read tea leaves or people who communicate with your ancestors, or people who go and get their fortunes foretold by a parrot who pulls a card out of a bunch of cards. So, we do it all the time and we believe, well not everybody, but we mostly believe that this is possible essentially. Such practices continue to this day essentially. And in Europe there was a great fascination for such moving figures, moving automata or statues which could move around and shake their heads and so on. So, Pamela McCorduck writes in her book Machines Who Think that in medieval times the art of making clocks, decorated and animate figures were very popular essentially. So, if you go to Germany you can still find them, for example, in clock towers when it is 12 noon, suddenly there is a lot of music and some statues come out and do something and go back in, that kind of stuff.